Welcome to DDS. This is Ryhan Hassan, and he's a product designer in Figma. He's worked in Dropbox, interned at Apple, and he's also a CMU alumni. I think I'll let Ryan actually introduce himself and talk about his journey in design. Yeah.
Hey, I'm Brian. I'm a designer at Figma. I went to CMU many years ago and was studying CS. And I think through the process of building things with friends and implicitly designing the interface for things, and also the bumping into the courses and the HCII. So it helped me realize that I cared actually a lot more about the end user experience than I did necessarily the sort of front end engineering needed to make those things possible. But I do think that there's something really exciting about being able to straddle both worlds and know how to push how browsers render things to be able to inform what decisions we make. In terms of my journey, I was in school, not sure what I wanted to do, and product design was a pretty, I feel new term even for a role. I think up to that point, most designers were doing hardcore visual design, at least in industry, and people were asking me to draw icons and portfolio reviews and things like that. And I think what crystallized for me was there was this moment in the industry where the role shifted from pure or more visual kind of focused design to ownership over the sort of end-to-end of a feature or a product. And I think I joined the industry at that right moment where I was okay, this sort of problem solving makes sense to me. And I kind of jump in. And I basically joined a company that I thought was hey, I studied CS. I know nothing about visual design. I want to go work with people who are really good there. And fortunately, it kind of worked out. And I spent a lot of time working on a product called Dropbox Paper. I think with that, early on, a lot of the effort was I was thinking a lot about sort of visual design and typography and how to make this editor as minimal as possible. And in those first year or two of working on this product, it was just really good to work and work and iterate on it and really hone my eye and my ability there. The really surprising thing was when we launched the product 2 years later, we had been loving it internally and beta testers had really liked it. But what we realized was oh, that's actually not enough to make a really effective product that grows on its own, that lots of people adopt en masse. And I think through watching that product kind of go through its different stages, I kind of was exposed to the challenges that a new product will go through and what might be limiting of something. And I feel that was just a great class in being able to both think about here's the craft needed to make something that you're proud of is exciting, but also here's the very pragmatic things of how companies pick software or how tools spread through companies or through teams that sort of needs to kind of ladder together. Also, I definitely think it's exciting to work on a product for a long period of time because I think when you dip in and out of projects, you get exposed to lots of different domains quickly, which is really exciting. But you also don't get to learn from your own mistakes. And I feel there's lots of things that, I did and then was oh, a year later, wow, that was a really bad decision. And then through that process, I think I saw things with collaborative tools, for example. If you think about the fundamental unit about how people work together, you might think, hey, to make this tool spread as much as possible, we want people to share as much as possible and make things as transparent internally as you possibly can. And one of the challenges there is it doesn't actually map to how groups of people work together. Everyone has these really seed ideas that are really, really fragile, and you need a space to be able to incubate early ideas. You probably have a trusted collaborator that you want to confide in and kind of share things early. But then on the other side of the spectrum, when you're part of a big team, you also want to maximize visibility and transparency across a large number of people when there's no one person who can be responsible for organizing everything. And I feel a lot of the problems there at Dropbox actually mirror a lot of the problems at Figma, where when designing, when a designer is making a design and trying to share it with their team or gather the right feedback, having people jump in and give you the feedback that you're not ready for or aren't hoping for yet, and might shut down ideas prematurely. And so there's also weird social problems that actually kind of come out of working on collaborative software that just take honestly months and months to see the impact of some of those decisions. I can keep going on, but I'll give it back to you.
Yeah, so just going back a little bit. So you said that from CS, you transitioned into UX. When you did that, what were your strengths? How did did you transfer your visual design skills directly, or you learned it on the go? Were you a self-learner, or you just this projects actually led you to your path?
Yeah, so I feel like I would describe it as like self-directed learning, but with seeking out mentors. And I think it's like, I feel like I realized that I don't learn well in like following like a book or like a course. Like I really need like a project to sink my teeth into. And I think what I like about that is like mirrors like, like Googling Stack Overflow to fix something where it's like you're trying to accomplish something, you're realizing it's not there for whatever reason, and trying to seek out that feedback of like why is like actually helps you go like one layer deeper. And yeah, like I think I definitely sought out people in the industry, and also especially like on Twitter who would just give one-on-one time or like feedback, and also like coworkers in my like first job. And I feel like many of those people, like I still like when I'm working on things or like right now, I still like will like message them and be like, hey, like, I need a second pair of eyes. What do you think of X, Y, or Z? And I feel like that sort of like trust is just like very nice to like nurture. Actually, my current manager at Figma was someone who also went to CMU, but I remember like when I was first getting into the industry, I was like asking for his feedback of like, how should I structure my portfolio or resume? And I feel like those relationships that you have even in like college, like will follow you for like years and years.
Oh, that's really nice. Actually, how does a day in your life look like? Like, can you just walk us through this whole journey? Yeah.
I guess like my like average week usually is like a 50-50 split of like free time to like kind of go and think about things and kind of go deep on a problem. And the other 50 is the time like working with other designers, working with other people on my team, going to critiques, doing research sessions, and going to product reviews and kind of like social things. And so like, for example, like today, like my morning is usually pretty free. So that's like my time to be able to like, oftentimes like I'll split my work into two types of work. One is like thinking or like synthesis work where like I will like oftentimes like open up like FigJam and organize like my thoughts or write it down somewhere, or like something that is more like execution focused depending on the project where I'm like heads down, I don't want to be interrupted, and I kind of like want to think through and visually kind of explore a problem. But then interspersed with all of that are like research sessions, like we have a crit later today. And so those are all like great moments where I'm like trying to get a sense of what else is going on the team and sort of trying to coordinate as much as I can. I also maintain Figma's internal design system. And so I think that has like some unique challenges where basically our team is starting to grow. And so we're just right at the point where like not everyone knows what everyone is working on. And so that means trying to figure out ways to scale knowledge of like how Figma works and how to design in Figma and making resources for that. So oftentimes if I see people asking lots of similar questions, like I'll try to like pull that into our onboarding, or I'll try to like write documentation about it, or I'll try to draw sticker sheets of things that you can use so that if someone new joins Figma, they have a lot more things ready to go that will help them make better things more quickly.
Talking about your work, being a collaborative tool designer, what do you think is like a generalist skill that you have and some of the specialist skills that you possess?
I feel like I think of it as like like everyone is like sort of T-shaped, and so I think there's like a minimum bar of like visual craft, interaction craft, like product thinking, your ability to like go through a process, like classic like understanding what problem you have at hand, defining that, exploring the solution space, converging and iterating. But I think there's like lots of people within the team that have different strengths at different parts of the problem. And I think for Figma, actually like bringing together people who like complement each other is actually really nice. I think when you have a really small team, you need everyone to do everything. But I think now we're starting to hit a point where there's some problems that are much more, for example, if you're working on auto layout or something like that, you'll go a lot more in depth into the model of like how things get laid out and this like CSS specs. And I feel like that oftentimes necessitates having some stronger like technical understanding of how things are working that might not be as like classic in terms of the sort of explore a wide range of like solutions that you might expect. Whereas like other surfaces, I'm thinking about like the file browser where there's a much more open-ended problem of like how do large groups of people like organize their files and navigate through them. Falls into a solution space that is, I think, a lot more ambiguous, and you're like less bound by like the technical like, constraint of what is the web capable of. but it also means that you have to navigate a lot of ambiguity and having a lot of clarity in terms of your own process and your own sort of the ability to converge there is like very helpful. And so I think now different parts of the team will have like a little bit like slightly different strengths. I think Figma is actually another example where I think with Figma design, oftentimes we're trying to make sure that new features fit very cleanly into the existing IA and the existing editor, and try to make it feel like this thing has always been there and it's like not a new thing. Whereas like in FigJam, we're trying to figure out like what is resonating and what is really valuable. And so in a lot of those cases, we're going to try features that are a little bit like weirder in terms of they break patterns or do things differently. That's kind of like the value of FigJam of like, oh, we would never do a huge toolbar in Figma design, but doing it in this new context allows us to try out ideas that we can see like how they're working. And if there is something really great, we can also pull it back across our other products.
FigJam is really a recent thing, like it was Figma designed before. And I think collaborative tools also has traveled a lot, especially, after COVID. So considering where we were then, like, what do you think is like the next step for collaborative tools?
I feel like the thing in the back of my head is like always trying to shorten the distance between idea in someone's head to the actual working model of that thing. And the closer you can bring those two, the sort of faster like the pace of iteration you can kind of get. And so I think of like Webflow as a really nice example of, I think traditionally you would have a designer designing like a PSD, hand it to someone else builds it, and you wait a few weeks before you see the actual implemented thing. You get feedback, and then you like go through that cycle again. And moments where you can kind of condense that, where like designers are able to directly like manipulate the end product, I mean that you can just much more quickly tweak things and get things done. And in the context of product design, I feel like we're already moving in that direction where a lot of like advanced like design systems are oftentimes like about making sure that our design components and code are mirrored like one-to-one. And I can totally see a future where more sort of direct design to code style things that become possible within like larger teams. And not in a Dreamweaver sense, but in there's some upfront cost to it, but you create a system that makes this kind of end-to-end connection very, very fast. On the expression side too, I also think it used to be a lot harder for someone to just draw like the thing that they're trying to express. And I feel like the actual tooling to like make something and rearrange Lego blocks has gotten a lot easier. Where I think oftentimes like even like the expectations of like visual design for like product design is kind of like split. Where I think oftentimes you'll have a design systems person who is trying to aim for like consistency across a lot of surface areas. And you have like many more product designers who are able to like remix those parts to create like the ideal kind of like outcome. And so with that, like I think the roles of what you traditionally think of as like a PM and a product designer like start to actually come a lot closer together, where I can see people who might have previously been a PM considering becoming product designers or vice versa, where the actual fundamental like expressing an idea at a high level of fidelity is so much easier that like you can express your idea in a form that others can like engage with much more quickly than you could 10 years ago. And I feel like that trend on both ends feels like it's like steadily moving forward.
Yeah, speaking of the gap between what we actually imagine and what we actually want to see in the design, collaborative tools, people are actually wanting to have different things. Like they wanted some other features. And as technology is like moving fast, Figma, of course, created a really good mark in getting everybody on board, working remotely. Even we are so much happy as students. We don't have to go to classes and then be in a place if we are not feeling well and all. So what do you think, like for different groups of people who are actually working in such collaborative tools, what are the features that the people are looking at? Like,
in terms of features, I think like the lens that we're often like looking at is there's like individual things that everyone has. Like I have like my own gripes of I wish Figma or FigJam did X, Y, or Z. But often things that like the things that really matter most are the things that like make it possible for others to take part. And so, for example, like if I'm working on a project and there's something that's keeping people I'm working with from feeling comfortable, like giving feedback or weighing in or trying out an idea, then I feel like features that might not be for me help that person participate more quickly, feel like the thing that like really matters most. I think like one metaphor that I'm like anchored on is a writer and a researcher might come to the same project, and we might be like looking at like the same sort of set of mocks, but we really have different toolboxes that we're bringing, and we don't necessarily want to like all use the same interface to manipulate the same thing. Someone might want to like primarily just try editing text and seeing how things resize and making sure that things like look right textually, while someone else might be thinking about like, how do I use this into some bigger themes or some bigger concepts? And that requires like a different sort of interface and a different set of tools to do that really effectively. And similarly with someone doing like pixel level execution work, I definitely need a different level of precision than someone else who like might be just trying to like quickly try out like an idea. And I feel like in the future, like we'll see like more like catered things for the type of thing you're trying to accomplish rather than trying to make one interface for everyone.
The collaborative tools thing that actually came out is the metaverse and perceiving things in 3D, like as if they're being there. Do you think that collaborative tools can actually move in that direction also, where we are like virtually in a space, not physically being present, but perceiving it in a very different way in 3D?
Maybe. I feel like it's like one of those things where it feels like far enough away where I couldn't imagine, I would not want to like work in VR for an extended period of time. But I feel like I've seen so much progress, right? Where, like maybe something will come of it in a few years' time. But I think it's like still at the base of the curve and it's really hard to tell like where it'll be. I think like right now, I feel like I see a lot of value in presence in the tool itself. So not necessarily your ability to see my hands or like where my feet are, but rather, hey, like when I'm pointing at a thing like on screen, we both have that shared sense of we're interacting with this together. And so I think like in the hardware that we have today, I actually think that the ideas of you like through like via a cursor or some other representation is actually a much more friendly kind of like way to interact with other people, even though it might not be like photorealistic.
How do you relax as a person? What are your things that you do? Just your creative juices flowing or something?
I feel I'm definitely a person, I'll be the first to admit that I'm like very into work. And so I feel like that's like always like a low level like thread that is like somewhere floating around. I think part of that is like, just being immersed in working on design tools, talking to designers, it just permeates everything. But to get away from it, I definitely really enjoy cooking at home or like going for runs and kind of like exploring. Like I just moved to a new city. And so I feel like a lot of my like weekends and nights have been like exploring New York, just been super fun. I will admit that like I also sometimes will take an iPad and go for really long walks. And it's like both my way to just read something, but also like capture like long form notes, almost kind of like a diary. But I think it's like my way of just getting away from like a computer that I use for work and pulling together like raw thoughts and like trying to shape them into something that I can like process.
Okay. So I think you just moved to New York, right? Like recently, right?
Yeah.
So how was like how did the actually environment, did it change you as a way a designer is? Is it different how people work in different cities? Or is it
In terms of the actual day-to-day, it hasn't changed that much. I will say the biggest impact for me has been like time zones, where a lot of the people I work with are in California. And so it means like I will rarely get meetings before noon, which means that my mornings are usually my time where I can like be focused and be undisturbed. Whereas like my afternoons are usually the time where people start waking up in California and are excited to like collaborate or look at work and talk about it.
does it have any barriers when you're doing research on collaborative tools, being at different time zones and trying to formulate an idea? And even my days used to start like really late, probably at night. And then we used to have so many barriers in the sense like, if I want to get a research done in New York, then I will be preparing for it. And then something might change. And then the whole process kind of changes overnight.
We actually thought a lot about the overlap in terms of time zones. And so most of the design team, for example, is in like Europe, New York, or like the West Coast. And so I feel like we've definitely set aside like certain hours as like, these are prime hours that overlap. And so let's try to make sure that any sort of team things kind of happen there. In terms of collaboration on research and things like that, I think it's really valuable to be able to sit together and not do that asynchronously. I think synthesis, for example, like really happens best when it's like in a room together, like the Zoom room. And so I think for those, I basically block out like a few hours throughout the week that are dedicated to like, I don't know what we're going to use this time for, but if we're on an ambiguous problem, like I just want like time for us to talk through things and capture even those like ideas that we're not really confident about yet, and just put it down somewhere and kind of see where it goes. I think it's like it feels like a good compliment to like critique of, oh, there's moments where you have an idea and you're ready for it to be really kind of looked over and gather deep feedback. But there's also moments where you don't really know what your thought is yet, but you have thoughts in the back of your head and you're trying to put words to them. And I feel like talking through them with another person, at least for me, is like a really helpful way to like clarify some of those things.
Okay.
I think like one of the things that was really helpful early on was, I think I was just very eager to take on like projects and share those like publicly. I think there's like an aspect of, and I definitely don't think this is like a requirement, but I definitely think there's like something about taking initiative on your own for things, like both in terms of starting projects kind of like this, or even within your first job, like taking on things that might not be asked of you. But in those moments, you get a chance to try out a new skill and build your sort of repertoire of things you're able to do. I think earlier on, I think I was probably more structured about here are specific hard skills that I want to get better at, where I could be like, I can clearly see like my gap here. And so let me go focus on like building that up. I think now, I think a lot of the problems I feel like are more like I feel like confident in like my like ability to work on like a siloed project, but I think that all the skills around like how you like work with other people and like especially like groups of people feel, oh, like this is like actually this like skill that like takes effort to like consciously get better at, and especially work with people outside of design. I think it's like one of those things where, oh, there's definitely structured ways to get better at it, but there's also lots of moments where it's like through your interactions and through like particular scenarios, you're like reflecting on, oh, like that could have gone better in like this way, which is kind of, it's just like a very different thing to like sort of build, even though it's still like skill building.
We were talking about conflict management and working in teams. So there was this question that they asked us, like, is a conflict good or bad? What is your take on it?
I feel like this isn't like a new idea, but I feel like creative conflict is like a very good thing, where you have both ends of the spectrum, where like you can have teams where everyone is like really nice and wants to be best friends, but then there's like the hesitation to like point out something that like might not be great or might not be good enough. And that means like the actual thing that you're making together is, it might be fun to work on, but you're not actually proud of the work. There's also moments where I've seen teams where there's like someone who's extremely critical of everything, and they're like, I feel like those projects can feel like, oh, I'm trying to appease this person rather than necessarily trying to get to the like better outcome. And I feel like the in between part that I feel like I always want to aim for is like, I want everyone on the team to feel like they can point out things that like feel confusing or don't feel like as like seamless as they should be. And it's coming not from a place of you need to convince me that this is that or you must pick my direction, but rather we're all trying to aim for making whatever we're working on as good as possible and putting our name kind of behind that thing. And if you have like the trust in each other where you're like, yes, like I believe that you're coming at this with good intentions, then it's much easier to like push each other to be like, hey, that thing you're kind of trying out, I think it's a promising direction, but I think it might have like XYZ problems down the road. And it makes that conversation a lot more healthy because you're both aiming for the same thing.
What would be like one advice you will give for this young designers who are watching this?
I see some designers do that I really value is actually just like writing. I feel like it's really easy to get caught up in the like artifacts around work or particular methods or like particular processes. But I think there's a lot of clarity in being able to just write in like plain language, like what you're doing and why and how you're thinking about it. And so I feel like a lot of the like best work happens in like the notes app or like the plain document. And if you can articulate it in words clearly, then it feels like it's an example of clear thinking that just will manifest in the work. Whereas if you purely focus on the facts around it, sometimes it can be easier to hide like a fuzzy point or like a intention behind some like nice visuals.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ryan.
Oh, awesome. That's great to hear.